Let me tell you something that most people only understand after they've already hurt someone who truly cared about them. And the strange thing is, it doesn't always happen during a big fight. It doesn't always come from anger. Sometimes the damage begins in a moment that looks completely ordinary, a moment that everyone around you forgets almost immediately. Everyone except the person who heard the words. For a long time, I didn't realize I had done that to my husband. In fact, for months I convinced myself that everything between us was perfectly fine. He still smiled when I came home from work. He still asked me how my day had been. He still kissed my forehead before leaving the house in the morning. From the outside, nothing had changed. But every night when we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I started noticing something small that I couldn't quite explain. His eyes were different. Not cold, not angry. Just a little farther away. Like there was a door somewhere inside him that used to be open, and now it was. And the worst part is that I didn't know how to open it again. This is the story of how that happened. And before you think this is just another story about a couple having problems, I want you to stay with me for a moment. Because what happened between my husband and me happens in more homes than people realize. Most of the time, nobody even notices it while it's happening. Not until something important has already been damaged. My husband's name is Daniel. And the strange thing is that when I first met him, my life was a complete mess. I had just gone through one of those painful endings that leave you feeling hollow for weeks. A close friendship of mine had fallen apart in a way that neither of us ever really explained. No big argument, no final conversation, just distance and silence. At the same time, I had recently moved to a new city for work. Everything around me felt unfamiliar. The streets, the coffee shops. Even the grocery store near my apartment felt strange, like I was walking through someone else's life instead of my own. My job wasn't helping either. It paid the bills, but every morning when my alarm went off, I felt this heavy feeling in my chest. The kind that makes you stare at the ceiling for a few extra minutes, wondering how you ended up somewhere that doesn't feel like the place you were meant to be. Love was the last thing on my mind during that time. I wasn't looking for a relationship. Honestly, I barely had the energy to keep my own life from falling apart. And then Daniel appeared. Not in some dramatic movie moment, not in a romantic setting, just in a small bookstore a few blocks away from my apartment. It was one of those quiet little places squeezed between two other shops on a narrow street. A bakery on one side, a dry cleaner on the other. I used to go there sometimes after work. Not because I needed a book, mostly because it was peaceful. The soft sound of pages turning, the faint smell of paper and coffee. It was the kind of place where nobody expected anything from you. That evening, I was standing in the fiction aisle, reaching for a novel on the top shelf. At the exact same moment, another hand reached for the same book. Our fingers bumped into each other. Both of us paused. I looked up, and there he was, tall, slightly messy dark hair, a worn jacket that looked like he'd had it for years. He glanced down at the book, then back at me. And in the most serious voice imaginable, he said, "I think I need this more than you. I'm having a terrible week." For a moment, I just stared at him, and then something unexpected happened. I laughed, not the small, polite laugh people give when they're trying to be nice. A real laugh, the kind that escapes before you even realize it's coming out. It had been months since I had laughed like that. Daniel smiled when he saw my reaction. "Okay," he said, holding the book between us. "Maybe we both need it." We ended up standing there in that bookstore talking for almost 2 hours, about books we liked, about the strange habits people develop when they read, about how some stories stay with you long after you've finished them. The conversation was easy in a way that surprised me. There was no pressure, no awkward pauses. At some point, we both noticed the employee at the front counter stacking chairs. The store was about to close. Daniel looked down at the book we were both still holding. Then he did something that shocked me. Without warning, he tore the book in half, right down the middle. I gasped. "You can't do that," I said. He calmly handed me one half of the book. "Now we both have to finish it," he said. "Next week we meet here and trade." It was such a ridiculous idea that I couldn't stop smiling, but a week later I went back, and he was there. The week after that, we met again, and somewhere between those quiet evenings in that little bookstore, something began to grow between us. Not loudly, not dramatically, just slowly, comfortably. Like two people discovering that the world feels a little easier when the other one is around. 3 years later, the torn halves of that paperback book were sitting on a shelf in the small house Daniel and I shared together. It had become a strange little symbol between us. The beginning of our story. Daniel had a way of noticing things about me that most people completely missed, not just the obvious things like birthdays or favorite foods, small details. Like how I always needed a glass of water next to the bed before going to sleep, or how I pretended I didn't mind driving in the rain, even though it secretly made me nervous. Or how when I was anxious about something, my laugh became louder than usual. He noticed all of it. And in a world where most people were always distracted by something else, Daniel had this rare ability to be completely present. When he listened to you, you could feel it. Like you actually mattered in that moment. We got married in a small ceremony, nothing extravagant, just our families and a few close friends gathered in a quiet outdoor space. Soft lights hung from the trees, a warm breeze moved through the air. It was simple and perfect. The first few years of our marriage were easy in the way early love often is. We worked during the day, cooked dinner together in the evenings, argued occasionally about small things like whose turn it was to take the trash out, but mostly, life felt steady, safe. Like we had found our rhythm, and then something happened that slowly started to change that rhythm. Daniel had a dream, not the kind people casually mention and then forget about. The kind that stays inside someone for years. The kind that refuses to leave them alone. He wanted to start his own landscaping and outdoor design company. Daniel had always been talented at it. He could walk past a completely ordinary piece of land and immediately start imagining what it could become, where the trees should go, where a stone path might curve through the grass, where the sunlight would fall in the late afternoon. Sometimes he would say something that stayed with me. "Every place can become beautiful," he once told me. "It just needs the right hands and enough time." Eventually, he decided to take the risk. He left his stable job and began building the company from the ground up. At first, I supported him completely. I really did. But what I didn't understand at the time was how difficult the beginning would be. And that's where the real story begins. What I didn't understand at the time was that Daniel had already started fighting a quiet battle inside his own mind. A battle between believing in his dream and wondering if he had made the worst mistake of his life. But he never showed that struggle to me, at least not in the beginning. Every morning, Daniel woke up before I did. Sometimes I would hear him moving around the kitchen while it was still dark outside. The quiet sound of the coffee machine. Cabinet doors opening and closing softly. Occasionally the back door creaking as he stepped outside to check the weather before leaving for a job site. By the time I walked into the kitchen, dressed for work, he already looked like he had been awake for hours. Boots on, coffee half finished. His phone in his hand while he checked emails that almost never contained good news that early in the morning. But the moment he saw me, he always smiled. A real smile. "Morning," he'd say. Then he'd lean over and kiss my forehead like everything in the world was perfectly under control. And for a long time, I believed that it was. But starting a business isn't the exciting adventure people imagine. Most days are quiet, uncertain, and sometimes painfully slow. Some weeks Daniel would get a small job. Maybe designing a garden for a new homeowner, or fixing a yard that someone had neglected for years. Those were good days. He'd come home dusty and tired but full of energy, talking quickly about new ideas. Where he might place a stone pathway. What kind of trees would grow best in a certain space. How outdoor lights could completely change the feeling of a yard at night. I loved seeing that excitement in him, but there were other weeks too. Weeks where the phone didn't ring. Weeks where no new clients appeared. On those days, Daniel would sit at the kitchen table with his laptop open, sending proposals to people he had never met. Sometimes he would send 5 or 6 in a single afternoon. Then he would wait, and most of the time nothing came back. At first I tried to be encouraging. I told him things like, "Every business takes time to grow," or "It's normal for the first year to be slow." And when I said those words, I meant them, but something inside me had started changing. Not suddenly, quietly, like a slow shift in the air that you don't notice until it has already happened. Money became tighter than it had been before. We started thinking more carefully about small things, eating out less, putting off little purchases that once would have seemed insignificant. Vacations became something we talked about someday instead of something we actually planned. None of this was Daniel's fault. I know that now. But fear does something strange to the way we see the people closest to us. Instead of sharing that fear honestly with him, I started doing something else. Something much worse. I turned my anxiety into small comments, little remarks that sounded reasonable on the surface, even responsible, but underneath them was something sharp, something discouraging. One evening, we were sitting at the dinner table when Daniel started talking about a potential client. He had visited their house earlier that day. They were thinking about redesigning their entire backyard. He was excited. He kept describing the space, where he might build a curved stone walkway where raised garden beds could go. How the lighting could make the yard look beautiful at night. I remember nodding while he spoke, and then I said something that I thought was practical, something sensible. "Maybe you shouldn't get too excited until they actually confirm the project." I didn't say it harshly. In my mind, I was simply being realistic, but Daniel went quiet for a moment. Just a small pause, then he nodded slowly. "Yeah, you're probably right." At the time, I barely noticed the change in his voice. It was subtle, almost invisible. But looking back now, I realized something important. That moment was one of the first tiny cracks I created. A few days later, during another conversation about money, I said something else. "You know, there's no shame in going back to a regular job for a while." Again, I thought I was helping. I thought I was relieving pressure from him. But what Daniel heard was something very different. What he heard was, "Maybe you're not capable of making this work." And the worst part is that I didn't realize how often I was doing it. Small comments, small doubts, little reminders of the risk he had taken. None of them sounded cruel. None of them started arguments, but over time they added up. Like tiny stones dropping into a bucket, one by one, until eventually the weight becomes impossible to ignore. Looking back now, I understand something I wish I had understood then. Daniel already knew how difficult things were. He didn't need reminders. He didn't need warnings about failure. He was already thinking about those things every night. Already lying awake sometimes, wondering if he had made the wrong decision. Already asking himself if he was letting me down. And instead of being the voice that quieted those fears, I became another voice inside them. I didn't mean to, but intention doesn't erase impact. If anything, the fact that I loved him made it worse. Because the opinion that mattered most to Daniel was mine. Still, life kept moving forward. Daniel kept working, kept trying, kept building the business piece by piece. Slowly, patiently. And then one evening in early spring, something happened that would lead to the worst moment of our marriage. We were invited to a dinner party. It was hosted by a couple named Aisha and Marcus. Marcus worked in the same industry as Daniel. He also owned a landscaping company. The difference was that Marcus's business was already successful, very successful. The kind of success that people can feel the moment they step into your home. The kind that quietly says one thing without anyone needing to speak it. This person made it. When we pulled up to their house that evening, I remember sitting in the car for a moment before opening my door. The house was beautiful, large windows glowing warmly from inside. Soft lights lining the stone walkway leading to the front door. Even the landscaping around the property looked perfect. Of course it did. This was Marcus's work. Daniel looked at the yard too. But not with jealousy, not with resentment, more like quiet admiration, like an artist looking at another artist's masterpiece. "Wow," he said softly, That's really impressive, I nodded. But the feeling inside me wasn't admiration. It was something much uglier, something I'm not proud of.